Welcome to another episode of the Dana Yee Show. In this episode, I'm going to cover what credit is, why it's important, why good credit is sort of a paradox, and what you can do to improve your own credit score. Obligatory disclaimer, I'm not a financial advisor, I'm just here to educate and entertain. I think this is a really important topic and I put a lot of time into my videos, so if you enjoy, make sure to like, and if you want to see more about money and finance, make sure to subscribe. To start with, what is credit? Credit is generally defined as an agreement between a lender and a borrower who promises to repay the lender at a later date, generally with interest. For example, if you want to borrow $100 from someone, they might charge you 5% interest, so by the time you pay them back, you'll be paying back $105. Also, interesting note that credit can also refer to an individual or business's credit worthiness or credit history. So credit can refer to how good or bad someone's credit is. Kind of Inception, but interesting, and we'll cover more about how this is calculated and what you can do about it later in the video. There are different types of credits, such as mortgages, auto loans, credit card loans are the first few that come to mind, and the bulk of this video will cover on credit cards. In the United States, there are 3 credit bureaus: Experian, Equifax, and TransUnion. And these all score based on the FICO model. So sort of interesting point, the score that you have at each of these 3 bureaus may be slightly different, but they should be around the same range. So why is credit important? You need credit to get loans, and the better your credit, the better interest rates you'll get on loans. Right, because before briefly mentioned that when you take out a loan, you need to pay it back with interest. And this chart actually gives a good example of why it's important to have good credit. This is a plot of credit scores to interest rates for a 30-year fixed rate mortgage of $200,000. Let's look at the extremes. So for someone with a very good credit score of between 760 and 850, their total interest looks to be around a 3.7 or 3.8% interest, which means over the course of 30 years, they'll be paying $140,000 in interest. If we go to the other end of the spectrum, someone with more poor credit, around 620 to 640, they might have an APR of almost 5.5%, which will lead to more interest than actual principal paid on the mortgage over the course of 30 years. And note, this is a difference of $60,000. So obviously that's a lot of money. And the trend is actually sort of linear based on the credit score. So really interesting point here. The better your credit, the less you'll pay in interest on loans. And another small thing about credit cards, you can use them for bonuses. So for example, the Chase Freedom Flex has a reward rate of 1 to 5%. And I think right now they actually have a sign-up offer of $200 if you spend a certain amount. So that's just another thing. Not really important about why you should have credit, but another benefit of having credit and using credit cards. Now onto why good credit is a paradox. I sort of relate this to the work experience paradox. You've probably all seen the memes before where the 2 guys are yelling at each other. The person looking for a job says, "I need a job." The employer says, "I can't hire you without experience." The person says, "But you need a job to get experience." And the employer says, "Work." And the person says, "Give me a job." And the employer says, "You need experience." It's sort of this cycle of, to get work, you need experience. But to get experience, you need work. And here's another classic meme, the reflection Spider-Man. I'm not really sure what it's called, but you need work experience to get the job, and you need a job to get work experience. Now, if we relate this to credit and credit history, you need credit history to get good credit, and you need good credit to get new lines of credit. It's sort of this chicken and egg thing, right? Another thing about credit is that credit is very necessary if you want to take out a mortgage, if you need an auto loan on a car, and other things, but credit is very easy to misuse. Especially in the modern age, credit cards are very easy to get. There are a lot of programs of buy now, pay later that charge a lot of interest, and they can be very easy to misuse and essentially spend money that you can't afford to spend. So for example, this I pulled from an article on cardrates.com. The average American household with a net worth between $25,000 and $100,000 had approximately $6,800 of credit card debt. And this actually increased for households with higher net worths. But the group with the largest amount of credit card debt is the 0 or negative net worth group, right? Where net worth is assets minus liabilities, with an average household debt of $10,308. So this also shows the disparity. People who don't have enough to cover bills or might not have enough to buy things that they want might take out lines of credit to purchase these things, but since they don't have the full amount to cover it, they'll need to pay higher interest because they most likely have a lower credit score, which causes them to pay more interest, which causes Like, it's sort of this cycle of bad credit scores, paying more interest, and sort of, again, this negative cycle. Another reason credit is kind of a paradox is that credit cards use these bonuses to get people to sign up, but because it's so easy to misuse their credit, they don't get essentially the bonus of the bonus because they spend money just to get the bonus. For example, if a credit card company has a $200 sign-up bonus if you spend $1,000 in the first month, and you spend $1,000 on a new phone or a new computer or something you didn't really need, you didn't get the $200 back. You just spent $1,000. Another interesting article I wanted to briefly touch on was this report from the National Consumer Law Center titled The Credit Card Score Pandemic Paradox and Credit Invisibility, which essentially notes that the average FICO score has risen from 703 to 711 during the pandemic. And this is curious, right? Unemployment has gone up, a lot of people have lost their jobs, a lot of businesses have closed down, and overall the economy has been in kind of a mess for the past year. So why did the credit score go up? There are a couple theories and reasons for this, I believe. One is something called the K-shaped US economy, and this just means if you look at the shape of a K-shaped recovery is essentially noting the divide between the rich and the poor. So the rich are generally getting richer over the course of the pandemic, and the poor are getting more poor over the course of the pandemic. Another good reason, I think, as to why credit scores have increased over the past year is because a lot of businesses have closed down, a lot of stores have shut down, restaurants have closed down, which obviously is a bad thing, but for the consumer, this means that there are fewer places to spend money, which means that people are more likely to spend less on their credit cards, and by reducing your credit card balance or your utilization, you can improve your credit score, which I'll touch on in a little bit. Okay, now on to you. What can you do about your credit score? How can you maintain a good credit score or improve your credit score? First thing, you need to know what your credit score is. There are a few ways to get your credit score. Again, there are 3 credit bureaus in the United States, and you actually are entitled to a free copy of your credit report every 12 months from each of the 3 credit bureaus. So theoretically, you can request one from each every 4 months. Additionally, you can get a free monthly Equifax report, which is actually what I do, and I do it through Mint, which is a personal finance app. And every month it just updates me on my credit score, and it breaks down the different sections of the credit score and just allows me to make sure things look right and maintain and stay updated essentially with my credit score. Okay, now on to the actual credit score. This is a screenshot I pulled from myfico.com, which essentially gives a breakdown of your FICO score. I'll go over it in terms of largest weighting to lowest weighting, what each one means, and how you can improve this section. So the largest weighting is payment history. This essentially looks at, do you pay your bills on time? So any late payments are bad, and they can stay on your credit report for up to 7 years. So obviously, the way to improve this section is pay on time. Relatively self-explanatory, right? And the reason this is such a large weighting is that if institutions see that you're continually paying your bills late or just not paying them at all, this is higher risk and more likelihood that you're going to pay late or not pay at all in the future. And in order to mitigate this risk, the institution loaning you will have to charge you higher interest for the higher risk that they need to take on. The next section is 30% of your credit score is made up of the amounts owed. This is also what you may have heard as the credit utilization. Simply calculated, this is the credit used divided by the credit available. So for example, if you have a credit limit of $100 and you use $50 a month, this is a 50% credit utilization, and that's pretty high. However, if you had a credit limit of $1,000 and you use the same $50, this is only a utilization of 5%, even though in both cases you're spending the same amount of money. So there are 2 ways to improve your score in this section. If we look at the fraction, you can either decrease the amount of credit used, so spend less money. Obviously, it's hard to say and situations are different, but ideally you want to spend less money, or you can increase the credit available to you. There is a slight caveat here. So currently, if your credit available is $1,000, you can call your credit card company and say, hey, can you raise my limit to $1,500 to $2,000? And that will decrease your credit utilization if you use the same amount of money. This means that if you increase your credit utilization, let's say from $1,000 to $2,000, this doesn't mean you should double your spending. This doesn't mean you should spend $1,000 more. The reason that you want to increase the credit available to you is so that whatever you're using, if you don't change it, it's a smaller percentage of the total that's available to you. So again, just because you have more credit doesn't mean you should spend more money. Next up, in terms of weight, 15% of your credit score is made up of the length of your credit history. This one is pretty self-explanatory. How long have you had your oldest credit card? How old is your newest credit card? What's the average age of credit that you have? Institutions see this as if you're newer credit, you don't have as much history, so you might be higher risk. And if, say, you've had 10 years of credit history and good payment history and generally low credit utilization, they might see this as less risk and give you a better interest rate. There's no quick way to solve this one. The main way is to have credit for longer. And of course, this just takes time. And ideally, the earlier in life you can open a credit card, the better, because that means you'll be able to start building your history and length of history earlier. 10% of your credit score is made up of what is called new credit, and this is essentially how many lines of credit are you applying to open. It might be different for mortgages, but in terms of credit cards, if you're applying for, let's say, 5 credit cards a month, this might raise a red flag to institutions. Why do you need so many credit cards? Is it because you're spending all the money you have so you need more lines of credit? Is it because you're trying to transfer one balance over to another credit card? All things of which would be red flags to institutions. The main solution to this is don't apply for too many lines at once, just because it might be seen as more risk if you're trying to go around and open hundreds of lines of credit at once. The last section of your credit score, another 10% of your credit score, is what's called credit mix. And this is essentially, do you have different credit cards? Do you have different types of credit? So do you have mortgages? Do you have other types of loans? How many credit cards do you have? And generally, the more lines of credit you have, and of course, with longer history and good payment history and less utilization, they will see this as less risk, because it shows that you're able to maintain all these lines of credit, pay them off on time, and you have a longer history. So the main, I suppose, way to increase this is have more lines of credit or varied types. So for example, mortgages. So overall, if we just sort of go around the circle, ideally, to increase your credit score, pay your bills on time, keep a low credit utilization, have a longer credit history, which just takes time to build up, don't apply for 10 credit cards at once, and try to build different lines of credit. So have multiple credit cards, have mortgages, have other types of loans. In conclusion, credit cards can be dangerous. For example, Dave Ramsey is very against them, and I completely understand why. If you are unable to control your spending, credit cards can be very, very dangerous. However, they can be used to build your credit and build yourself a better financial future. I think the main point, again, not financial advice, is that you should only use credit to buy things that you can pay off in full. This doesn't include a mortgage, of course, so again, just talking about credit cards. And this sort of begs the question, why don't you just use a debit card? And I came up with 3 main reasons why a credit card is better than a debit card, assuming that you don't spend recklessly and essentially you only buy things that you would be able to pay for in cash. First is protection. If someone runs off with your wallet and steals $100 of cash or steals your debit card and spends all of it, it's going to be very, very difficult, if not impossible, to get that money back. However, if someone uses your credit card, you can call up your credit card company and say, hey, that wasn't me. Can you cancel this charge and refund me my money? And most of the times they'll say yes. Secondly, debit cards are not credit cards. Debit cards don't build credit. Credit cards build credit. And credit, again, is important for getting low interest rate mortgages, lower APRs on auto loans or other credit cards and things like that. Thirdly, credit cards have rewards, right? I showed the card earlier. I believe it had 1 to 5% cash back. If you're using credit cards to buy stuff you would essentially already pay for in cash, so for example, if you're using a credit card to pay your bills, pay the utilities, pay rent, pay for gas, pay for food, these are expenses you're always going to have. You're always going to have to spend that money. If you put it on a credit card, you can get 5% back or whatever the reward is. If you put it on a debit card, you get 0% back. If you're spending the same money on a credit card and debit card, you'll get bonuses and rewards from the credit card. But again, with the caveat that on a credit card, you should not spend recklessly just because you have the credit available to you, right? Okay, this video is getting a little bit long for me, but I think this is such an important topic that so many people don't know about, definitely is not taught enough in schools. So I'm doing my best to educate. Make sure to share this video with your friends, and I'll see you guys next time.